Thanks, everybody. It's always fun to actually hang out with other engineers. I'm going to give a little bit more background just for context. So second generation civil engineer. My dad was chief engineer at Portman Erie, MARTA, so kind of grew up. And when I was 13, he got an IBM PC and said, build me something to do my job better. So I went on to build structural engineering analysis software for him. So that's kind of was my first view of computing. Went to Georgia Tech and was fortunate enough my advisor was the first professor to put classes on the internet. And he's like, hey, there's this internet thing, 1992. I need you to learn how to code my classes to be on this internet thing. So, it's kind of like I didn't choose to end up where I was. It just kind of happened in the process. Went and worked at a company called Law Engineering. George Sowers was my professor, so I went to go work at Law Engineering, which became MacTech, which I'm not sure what they are these days, but you guys have seen the M&A activity, so I don't know how they exist anymore. Was a field engineer doing geotechnical, construction materials testing, slumping concrete, like all of the above. Wondering every day why I went to Georgia Tech to get a civil engineering degree to slump concrete. Then I was doing building facades, dangling off buildings, and that's when I was like, I need to do something different. So started a tech startup doing construction management on the web, circa 1996. Contractors were like, this internet thing is a fad. It's only good for games and other activities. We will never use it in work. Never happened. And I like to bring that up because this industry has been one big head fake for me. I went to go build this, literally cash advances against credit cards to build this software. The GCs just Heisman me out of the way and said, we'll never do business with you, not a real thing. Pivoted into the telecom space. I had one initial client, this little company, WorldCom, that became a very big company. That grew my company from 2 people to 1,200 people, and we're able to take it public. When I left, I took a few years off, saw this company, Revit Technology Corp. I said, if people couldn't use the web, they're not going to use this thing called BIM. So built a company around that, sold it to a group in the Bay Area. Went to go work for Frank Gehry for about a year to help him build a tech strategy. And then basically quit again and went and hung out at my alma mater at Georgia Tech. At which time I was investing in startups, not AEC startups, not construction startups, because I felt like I'd been burned. And then I had a lot of my engineering and construction friends saying, hey, we built some technology. How do we turn that into a startup? How do we do that? Like, we're better. We can do this stuff. Or we want to invest in a startup. Isn't it just like Shark Tank? Don't we just do that? I'm like, no, that's a TV show. That's for entertainment purposes only. So started working with a lot of engineering firms, a lot of construction companies, architecture firms, really helping them understand innovation, at which point they said, hey, why don't you build a fund? We'll back you. Go invest in these startups, and it's kind of a group. So now we have over 100 strategic investors in the engineering and construction space. Now, the reason why I tell that story is not just to be a shameless plug. The idea that disruption is here, I think we've heard this before, right? We've heard it with BIM, we heard it with the internet, and there's always a cycle that says, hey, you know what, guys? You're not going to be in business in 5 years. There's always someone, there was a New York Times article this week, I don't know if y'all caught that basically said that. Like, you guys are not going to be in business in 5 years. AI is taking over. If you've been doing it a few cycles, you've seen this story. So I was hesitant to say the disruption is here, but I think it is. I think I've been head faked a few times in this industry, but I think this time it's for real. So anyway, AI is not new. OpenAI is a 15-year overnight success. I built an AI platform 10 years ago for a law firm that does construction litigation, and we were able to take contract documents in and connect it to their project management system and flag things real time, throw them into attorney-client privilege to start building up for claims later, right? It was so successful that the partners looked around and said, shut it down. They spent $5 million with me to build it. Then they said, shut it down because we don't know how to bill for this. We make a lot of money on discovery. You're getting rid of that. We don't know how to charge for it. Does that feel familiar? So this is not a new movie. This is the movie we've seen before. It's just the update to the movie. So it's been going on for a while. And I think when you look at that, a lot of it's just the progression of technology. It used to be really hard to build stuff. When I was building stuff for my dad in 1984, it was really hard. It was line by line, line by line, arduous. Then you had editors that let you build software easy. The web, when I was building websites, essentially, in 1992, it was very hard. There were no tools. It was all kind of command line, text-based. Right now, any of you guys could sign up for Squarespace or whatever and have a website done by the end of my talk with no coding knowledge needed. So really what we're seeing with AI is that while the stuff has been around for a while, the thing I coded 10 years ago was in Lisp, which is an assembly language. Like, it's just old school. Whereas now what's happened is all those hard things have just become easier. So I don't know if how many of y'all have any kind of ChatGPT AI on your phone? How often are you using it? Rarely. Daily? Getting it to write all your emails? My wife sent me a love note that was AI generated. And she was like, "Did you figure it out?" I'm like, "Yes, you never send me love notes." Like, I thought I was getting fished. Like, I thought you were going to ask me for my mother's maiden name and a credit card number. Like, I didn't know what was going on. I just had my 3rd-year anniversary with my wife, and I actually did send her like a little note that was AI generated. But I did disclose it was AI generated. But my thoughts were behind it. So there's lots of practical applications for those of you that are busy with work and don't get to spend time with your kids. You're on the road all the time. Send them an AI love note. It's pretty easy to do. But it's become the default standard now. Like, instead of Google, you go to the AI. I think some of y'all met my son last night at the reception. He was working at a structural engineering firm this summer, and he took the entire New York building code, brought it into an AI system, and had it auto-generate reports. And he had, next thing you know, he had 30 people, 30 engineers sitting around him going, "We hate writing reports. We hate doing this. Like, we don't bill enough for it. It's just not worth it." And he was showing, like, "Hey, I got the 80% solution. I don't have the 100% solution. I have the 80% solution. But I did it in 17 minutes." So he actually found that it was a great learning process for him. You know, you talk about mentorship and where this industry is going. I'll talk about it later. He found that last 20%, sitting next to a person that ran the New York building department, 40 years of experience, that last 20% was where the learning happened. It took away all the monotony and go research this. And he said that he felt like this summer he learned like 2 years' worth of forensic engineering because that's all he was working on. He wasn't doing busy work. So I really found that fascinating. I was going to let him talk for you this morning, but he's kind of shy. So what is AI? There's machine learning, and if you have questions, interrupt me. I mostly create all my own slides with the help of AI, by the way. By the end of the year, just so y'all know, if you're on a Microsoft platform, you will have, by the end of the year, an assist for every one of your platforms. That's Excel, that's PowerPoint, that's Word, that's all of it. And it's probably going to cost you like $50 a year. It's not going to be expensive. It's going to be included. So instead of having, I got to prepare for this presentation, I'm terrible at PowerPoint, you're going to be able to tell PowerPoint, make this one look like that other one, right? So I'd say for people that are deep thinkers that don't have time for a lot of that, like writing and how do I do this stuff, and how, we depend on admin staff to help us a lot. This will actually free you up to go straightly from your brain into a deliverable without having to explain it to someone else. So machine learning is basically the repetitive learning motion. So the system has a set of math, and as you teach it, it starts to reinform and reiterate the formula. This is the best way I could put it. So you set up one formula. The machine learns over time as you start saying correct, and as you start correcting it, it just changes the formula over time. So it iterates. And the idea is the more data you put through it, the better it learns. And we're going to talk about privacy and use of data a little bit later because it's become kind of a hot topic and a blind spot for a lot of firms when it comes to machine learning. Are you allowed to teach your machine with content that is not yours? Natural language processing is the idea of converting what you see in ChatGPT, the words, into the right words. When I built this thing for this law firm, there's nuances to our industry, right? There's nuances to what a valve is, what a this is, and defining what it is, not just alone, but in context of other words and themes is how you get to that. So that's what natural language processing. Computer vision, you all have it on your phones. Unless any of y'all have a flip phone, hopefully not. You have computer vision on your phone. And do you ever wonder why Apple already auto-recognizes your face in pictures and puts it into an album? That is computer vision. There is so much of that, and I'll show you some examples for our industry. When you think about anything that your teams do around visual inspection, one, do you trust the person? The oversight is, do I trust the person visually inspecting it? Have I trained them? Are they going to be able to inspect it and report back to me to sign off on it? And then, so were they talented enough? Do you replace that person? Maybe not. Do you de-skill the person that's doing that work? Yes, definitely. When I was an engineer, we had all these engineering technicians, and you had favorites. And the favorites were the ones that did a great job and paid attention and listened to you. And then if you got assigned a different technician, you're like, oh, I can wait till next week, till the other technician's available. So you start to flatten that a little bit. Robotics are simple. Neural networks, I'm not going to go deep into that. Not unless you have questions about it. I'm not going to bore you with the details. But these are the kind of key words. And this all means AI, right? When you see these words, this is basically some subset of AI. You're seeing it on other industries. And one thing you see in any technology, these subversive industries tend to drive the most innovation. It's rarely the mainstream. We have great video streaming because of one specific industry that monetized video streaming very well, right? Without that, there would not have been the millions that went into streaming because at some point we think streaming is free now. This is around plants and understanding disease in plants. Want to guess who spent hundreds of millions of dollars, is spending hundreds of millions of dollars in this space to understand disease in plants and yield management in plants? Anyone? Cannabis. They have the money to spend. It's very important to them. The soybean farmers aren't, right? It's the cannabis. So you do see this pattern. So you see it in agriculture. My CTO actually built this. My CTO has been with me for about 15 years. He's still on the keyboard writing code, and every once in a while he takes on side projects. So he actually built this agriculture for a friend of mine in Las Vegas that does cannabis. But essentially inspecting the leaves, understanding the disease, being able to identify the disease. And then from there, what's the treatment, right? What's the cure? So this is all happening. This is kind of actually old. This was a few years ago. Medicine. So this one's, I think, is really interesting. So if you think of ChatGPT as kind of the internet, like what is commonly available in terms of data sets, that's fantastic, which means that model, everybody has access to the same Google, everybody has access to the same ChatGPT. So that's a leveled playing field for everyone in this room. You all have it. So you're all the same when it comes to that. What's interesting about this was a private large language model that was developed for the medical industry. So instead of it being the internet, the content was fed by doctors. It wasn't fed by publicly available. So basically the doctors were interrogated, and the entire data set was from hundreds of physicians. And so what this is showing is, while ChatGPT is interesting, and it'll get you close to the answer, instead, we talk about it all the time, like, man, if I could clone that engineer, I'd have $1 billion firm, right? Well, guess what? Now you get to clone that engineer, right? You're basically going to build a large language model from your top engineers and interrogate them on the information, and that data is now available for use for your entire firm. So this is happening now. So this was with doctors. There's zero reason why you couldn't do it with engineers. There's zero reason. The technology exists. Any questions about this? This was the most interesting one that we keep an eye on. Questions? No? Law has lots of words. So it's really good for things like AI to understand, before I go through a 1,000-page document, let it go in and reference everything, tag everything, discovery. There is a lot of this technology already out. But once again, it's always going to be the 80, 90% solution, even if technically it's the 100% solution, right? And we tell our AI companies that we're investing in about 28 companies. Several are in the AI space. We tell them never tell the customer that it's 100%. They will not believe you. You will lose the sale. You think you're doing a good thing by saying it's bulletproof, but the psychology and skepticism is super important. People want to be part of the process. Do not take that away from them, even if you don't need them. If anyone's ever studied the Betty Crocker cake mix case study, it's a fantastic case study. They had cake mixes that all you did was add water and go, and they weren't selling them. And then they told people they had to add an egg, and all of a sudden they sold off the shelves. They didn't need to do that, but they knew that people needed to feel like they made it. So cracking one egg made them feel like they made it. So I always tell my startups, 80%. Other 20% is your expertise, even if it is 100%. Transportation. I don't know if any of you live in the Bay Area. Self-driving cars are kind of all over the place. Lots of noise about it, about how the accidents they've created. The difference is they will get better. I don't know that as humans we're getting to be better drivers. My 20-year-old sons, I think I've bought them 3 cars now already. So I don't know if there's any proof that us as humans are getting better at driving. I do guarantee the computer will get better at driving. I will tell you, I had the good fortune of working with some of the largest, most prolific VCs, whether it's Andreessen Horowitz or General Catalyst. And I did have a call with one of them last week, and they said, look, we are funding a company in the structural engineering space. I'm like, great. Like, let me know if they need introductions to structural engineering firms. Well, happy to, maybe help them out with some clients. They said, oh, no, we've decided it's too much friction to go to structural engineering firms and make them customers, so we're going to fund the next generation structural engineering firm. And they're going to put $50 million behind this startup. So it's an interesting dichotomy to think about. If we are viewed as resistant to adopt, we will just get left out. We're seeing it with architecture. Startups get funded. They say, like, we funded one company that sells to architects, and then we stopped because it's just a tough market to get mind share, to get buy-in. We can't afford the technology. Our fees are too low. So now think about that. Now a lot of these startups that we're selling to architects are now selling to real estate owners and developers to say, let me iterate on my own. I build shopping centers. I know a lot about shopping centers. I'll wait till I need to hire an architect. But all this has happened in the last 6 months. It's in the last 6 months because what the AI funders, the Andreessen Horowitzes of the world that have now raised billion-dollar funds, each firm has raised a billion-dollar fund around AI. They are targeting the oldest, biggest markets that have not been that innovative. And they're saying, let's go after healthcare, let's go after construction. They're targeting us, right? Because they believe if they can fund AI around that, they can displace that. That's reality, right? Not to be it's not about the fear of it all. That's just what's happening. Now, will they be successful? We don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I don't think they know. But they're going to deploy hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to try. So it's interesting kind of off of what Marcus said. As it relates to AI for AEC, ChatGPT is kind of, I would say it's like fun and games, like early days of the internet. There's some practical applications, but as far as, is it making my life easier every day doing the work? Maybe, maybe not, right? But what we're seeing, specific to our industry, things around location intelligence. If you think your GIS department knows what they're doing, you are wrong. Your GIS department is just obstructionist and doesn't actually know what they're doing. Anything Esri is developing has already been leapfrogged. There is so much more happening around location intelligence that is independent of Esri and anything else, which is the language that your GIS department knows. They know Esri, they know shapefiles, and they will tell you all about it if you listen. So Lots happening in location intelligence as it relates to zoning, predictive modeling around, let's not see where we need to build a school today. Where do we need to build a school for the next 5 or 10 years? What is the data telling us around the best place to put a school, the best place to put a concert venue? It's all being data-driven, and it's happening today. It's not a new thing. On the kind of pre-construction design side of things, there's lots of companies that are doing. Airworks actually does real-time monitoring of essentially grading. If you want to know like how much dirt's been moved and where, and is it aligned with the design, they're tracking that real time using cameras. You're seeing a lot in that space around the design element of things. Whether it's pipe sizing, there's a lot out there. Now, what I'll tell you is, our concern about these startups is we think with the advent of ChatGPT and the accessibility to AI, Bentley's going to come up with MicroStation Copilot. You will see this out of every one of your vendors in the next 6 months. So one thing I would be careful about is if you're going to work with a startup that has a single purpose, they better be doing something that looks like magic. Because chances are Bentley, Autodesk, maybe even Dell Tech will have a Copilot platform. They will have a button now already embedded, much like Microsoft. They don't have a choice. And the technology is not that hard. These folks, a lot of the incumbent software companies, they get to be incumbent because they can. They own the market. Autodesk owns the market. Bentley owns the market. They can do whatever they want. So they know that this is something they have to do. And they are hiring hundreds of people to go execute on this. So I would say, just from a practical perspective, be careful when thinking about startups. They better do something magical because it's probably just going to be a feature in the software that you already use. Field robots, and I'm going to show you an example. Huge opportunity there. We've invested in several. We invested in a company called Icon 3D that does 3D printed houses. To give you an understanding of scale, I was the first investor 4 years ago. They're now worth $3 billion. And it was a fascinating thing because they reached out to me through my publisher. And they're like, hey, KP, you've built a robotics company and you know how to slump concrete. We have something we want to show you. I was like, okay, I haven't done it in a minute, but I'll come hang out. And these 3 guys are in their backyard messing around with a robot and a concrete mixer, trying to build 3D printed walls. And we funded them, and now they're off to the races. They're actually building robots to build habitat on the moon. Like literally they got $75 million from NASA to go figure that out, how to build remote habitat. So you are seeing the robotics is going to be a big piece. Macro drivers there, labor shortage, it's not going to get better. Our kids don't want to swing hammers. And then, of course, things like immigration policy are not helping for that. So we're not going to have the talent. The talent's only going to be harder and harder. So you don't have a choice but other than robots. And I'll show you a good example of that. Progress monitoring. People walking around job sites to see how things are done. Was it done well? Thing of the past. Contractors waiting around. Hey, before I cover it up, the engineer needs to come inspect it. Well, let me see if I can get out there in 3 days. That's done. Like it's really moving towards, and that's actually been the low-hanging fruit, because a lot of firms just don't. It's a different motion, going from your desk out to the field, and then coordinating with the contractor. So you're seeing a lot of this take off pretty well. I would say safety is the common element. No matter, we have some very large general contractors, investors. The one thing I can always get them to get on a group call about is safety. They don't view safety as a competitive advantage. They just view it as being good people, and we don't want people to die, right? So they're all very, very collaborative on safety, which has been super interesting. And then inspection and asset management. Asset owners spend billions of dollars on assets that they know very little about. And then over time, it gets worse and worse. So you go buy a $10,000 car, you are given a maintenance schedule, you are given an owner's manual. You build a $100 million building, you're given a box of stuff and being told good luck, right? So it's not quite how it's supposed to be. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a company called aaronai. All of this was from 2D drone data. So this is not 3D scanning. They take the 2D drone video They auto-create a 3D model of the asset. They identify issues, including cracks. They then catalog those cracks in terms of level of severity. Then they throw it through an FEA engine and do analysis to see which cracks need to be repaired first. This happens in like 10 minutes. The drone operator, they are literally sending interns out as drone operators. So you don't have to have some specialty surveyor experience. The other use case that they've now expanded into is pavements. Very hard to inspect pavements. Go tell an airport operator they need to shut down so your people can walk up and down the runway. Instead, fly a drone straight up, take a few pictures, run it through analysis, identify all the cracks, dimensioning, types of cracks. Now they're doing all the kind of AASHTO crack categorization and stuff. They identify it all. Then they're able to actually start working on what do I fix first and now they're pushing into cost modeling, which is fantastic. So an asset owner like an airport can say, what is my maintenance budget? Instead of it being maybe something like this, they're actually getting very definitive prioritization and budgeting around that. They have been doing tremendously well in Europe. The US has been tough. Any ideas why?
Regulation.
What's that?
Regulation.
No, the asset owners want to go to their engineering firm. In Europe, they're actually working directly for the asset owner. So in the US, they've actually had to partner with engineering firms that have the IDIQ contract or whatever open contract they have with them, and they're having to go through them. But the question starts to become, well, how much longer will that be the case? We've had some of our investors that had literally kind of shut down their bridge inspection department. Too much trouble, too much liability, not that lucrative, et cetera. And they've actually started them back up just because of our startup. Because they're like, we already have the relationships and contracts. Now we can actually do the work, and make 50% gross margin. Not a terrible thing. Everybody loves watching robot videos. Most popular videos on YouTube. So this is an automated drywall finishing and painting robot. What is very unique about this is it's fully autonomous. You set it up in the room and you leave. And you come back the next morning and it's done. So what it's doing, so you think about the complexity, you say, well, what's the big deal? It's like an arm and it's spray painting. Like, what's the big deal? It actually walks around the room, creates a 3D model of the space first, looks for imperfections, et cetera, and understands what its flight plan is, essentially, which is super important. And that's why, it might be the first autonomous robot in the construction space. I don't know have any of y'all seen Spot the Dog? Right? The problem with Spot the Dog is it takes two people to walk behind it. Well, if I have two people to spare to walk behind a dog, a robotic dog, I could just do it myself. What's the value there, other than maybe safety situations and all? So we're really early in terms of seeing autonomy, where you just leave the drywalling robot alone and it just does work in the middle of the night and on weekends and in the heat, This is another one of our companies, Constructin. It does construction progress monitoring. What's super interesting about what they're doing is the contractors, the subs, and now the owners and developers are using them. So when it comes to progress payments, when it comes to accountability, they're able to take data from scanners, from iPhones, from whatever. They pull all that data in. They compare it to the drawings or the BIM model or both. And they're actually able to, and by the way, this is not the product at work, this is the demo. Because if we showed you the product, it would be a lot more cumbersome. But they can find discrepancies around dimensionings, builds, progress in general. So they're kind of basically looking at as-building in real time as they're building. This company's doing amazingly well. Every contractor out there is like, sign us up, sign us up. They are literally just trying to fill orders and customers these days. What I'll tell you what's interesting about this company, there are several companies that came ahead of them, And they did not invest enough in the technology. They got customers, and the next thing you know, they're spinning up 100 people in Vietnam to do it manually. So they've really, a lot of the, and that's one of these things in our industry. Sometimes I believe being first mover advantage is probably not the best thing. We like to see models where there's the first mover has educated the market, maybe tripped around a little bit, had enough success, and then our companies can be the second or third, right? Facebook wasn't the first, it was MySpace. So I think there's an idea that, especially in our industry, the education cycle, let's let someone else go do that, and we'll come in right after them. So just real quick, accuracy, I think we actually hit, that was one of the questions. Data governance. So I think this is a big one that we have to kind of address, right? You all create IP for a specific use. You license the contractor, the customer to use your IP for a specific use. I'm not sure that fair use means they get to feed it into an AI engine. I'm unsure of that. And there's a real question. So if a general contractor has 1,000 projects with sets of drawings and specs, and they feed it into an AI engine to give themselves a benefit, was that the fair right to use? Or do they owe you something for it? Or are they precluded from it? That's like a big question that I think, as an industry, no one's ever thought about, well, the contractor's not going to go build another wastewater treatment plant for someone. Like, they're not going to knock off my design, so to speak. But now we're entering a different zone. Could they use it to optimize and provide feedback to their customers, their clients, because they're becoming more client-centric, to say, hey, here's this best practices. You want to build a wastewater treatment plant? I have all this data. I have all this analysis to optimize sizing and capacity and everything else that was informed by 1,000 projects. I think that's a conversation that needs to have. My preference would be get paid for it. Don't block it. You want to use our drawings? Fine. Every time you use our data, you pay us for it. I think inhibiting it's probably a place of it's a lot more difficult. I think convincing a contractor just pay us a licensing fee for our IP, and we're happy. I don't know about blocking the use of it, but that's my opinion. Privacy. I had the CEO of a large engineering firm tell me, like, hey, my CTO implemented ChatGPT across our intranet. I was like, you have an intranet? Like, what is that? But and he said, yeah, it's amazing. We can ask the intranet all kinds of questions. I'm like, has anyone asked, am I fairly compensated? And he's like, why? I'm like, do we know that it didn't hit it had to hit the HR database to get the people. Did it also draw that little column called compensation? Do you know? He's like, I have no idea. Like, let me call and find out. He's like, I just told him to shut it down for now. So, the enthusiasm around implementing this stuff, I try not to thwart the enthusiasm, but I think there's a real question about, okay, what is the purpose? Like, what do we want our AI to do? And follow kind of narrow policy around that. Instead of just blocking and say, hey, let's not do anything. Hey, we will use AI to find out for proposal generation. What are similar projects to this that we've worked on? Have it pull up, stuff like that. I think someone asked the question just a second ago around biases. There are biases. We are ultimately responsible, whether it's by law or by just being good humans and leaders. That's something to keep an eye on. I think there's this apprehension when you're not a technologist and you're a CEO. Like, I'm not allowed to ask my CTO. I'm not qualified to ask the right questions. And I think that's a bunch of BS. I think you can ask the right questions and not, and ask them without like, oh, I don't have to know actually how it works, but like, what data are you using? I want to understand. Explain it to me. And I'll tell you, if a technologist cannot explain something to you about how it works, they're probably not the best fit for the job. They have to be able to explain it in layman's terms how it works so that you can have oversight into what you think it needs to happen. I actually have a policy. If anyone wants, you can email me. I basically took my web policy from the 90s and edited it for AI. And I think it's just like when the web, I remember we were implementing internet on desktops in engineering firms. Like, oh, don't put a web browser on it. We only want them to check email. Because, if they get on the web, they're just going to waste their time playing games and God knows what. So that was the initial reaction. Then, of course, we learned about productivity. So there's a way to govern this in a very simple way. So I came up with like a simple, it's a very unimpressive policy, but very practical. Reskilling, I think when we talk about talent shortage, I think we also have to talk about, there's certain industries, like my son that's an ME, trying to get him to come work in our industry. We're fighting with Tesla and Rivian to get him in our industry. It's tough, right? It's tough. It's super sexy stuff. Actually, I don't know if Scott Frank's here. Scott Frank with JB&B, I had him talk to my son. And Scott told him, hey, if you go work for Tesla, you're going to be designing a door handle for the rest of your life. So I've been working my kids hard, put them in front of Dilip and whoever else I can, tell them how awesome our industry is. So he's like, yeah, Dad, Mr. Frank told me I'd be designing a door handle. That sounds terrible. I'm like, yeah, okay. But I do think the reskilling and how we think about making things interesting, and that you don't have to be a top engineer from a top engineering school if you can be augmented with technology to be able to do your job. Government regulation, nobody knows. Lots of conversations. I would say if we're going to wait for Washington, D.C. to tell us what the policy is, one, it'll probably be wrong, and it'll probably be too late anyway. So I think we're problem solvers. I think we understand enough to really start to maybe self-regulate ourselves and have a path, right? It's not no, it's just not now. I think I don't like yeses and nos. I like yes, but, or no, not now. And I think that's a great way to think about regulation. So this is what I kind of hit on, is if we use these tools, so this idea that somehow your client isn't going to know that you're using an AI tool to do work and doesn't expect to see it in their invoice, you're wrong. They're probably going to start asking you, well, why am I paying so much? Aren't you using AI? Shouldn't you be using AI? They're going to start asking you that question. And so I think this idea that you'll have some advantage by using AI from pricing, that's where I kind of disagreed a little bit with the Goldman Sachs thing, and even a little bit of what Marcus was talking about on the slide, that, well, if you get there first, you can charge more. You can make better margins. And it's yeah, but how quickly will that change? There was a New York Times article just this week. Every one of your clients that reads the New York Times read that, and they're going to be calling saying, hey, I saw in this article that AI is transforming the engineering business and the architecture business. What are you doing? Why am I paying so much? Why am I paying so much? You guys are just punching into AI, aren't you? You're just not telling me. I'm not going to pay as much. So I think it's important that you can't, I think the time has passed to use that as a back office advantage. And I think you really have to think about client expectations. Also, reinventing how you think about contracting. The timesheet business, it's a tough one, right? It's all labor arbitrage. And it's a really tough one. And I think if you're going to build that way and work that way, then the good news is you won't have a workforce challenge. Your people will be doing a lot of work because of AI, but you're just not going to generate the fees. And so I think there has to be some creativity around kind of how you think about your pricing, your product. What is your product to your customer? I was on a call the other day with a reporter, and there's this idea that we're all working together with different objectives. Engineers and designers are doing plans and specs. That's the deliverable. Contractors building a building. Wow, it turns out they're working on the same team, but they have two different objectives. So how do you start to use technology to maybe align those objectives? And how do we start thinking about, when I worked for Frank Gehry, it was interesting. It was my first exposure to somebody that actually ignored all the rules. We built shop drawing level deliverables. And Frank's was, contractors are dumb. I don't want them to mess up my building. So I'm going to tell them how to do it. Every weld joint, every screw, everything was designed. And he was also I design buildings that go into markets where there may not be the best contractors in the world. So if I don't IKEAfy the whole thing, it won't get built right. And did he charge a lot more in fees? Well, yes, because he has the brand, but also because the customer felt comfortable that he actually owned the process. He wasn't just saying, I'm going to deliver plans and specs. It's It's like, no, I'm going to own the process of delivering you a product that you wanted, and it will meet your expectations. So I think there are opportunities to think about how the different business models are. Any questions about any of those things? Okay.
We've got one question so far on the app, and it's relative to the impact on professional licensing and whether there's any discussions at the regulatory boards about how to deal with AI-generated content and the role of the certifying engineer.
Yeah, I mean, everything we've heard so far has been nobody's going to take any data at face value. You know, you can fat finger an Excel spreadsheet just as well as an AI can do something wrong. I think it's still going to end up in professional registration in engineering. So what does that mean? That means that these companies, we tell them all the time, you cannot black box. When an engineer, Aaron's a great example. When the client asks you, how does it specifically work? How can I check its work? You have to be very open about that. You can't say, oh, it's a black box, it's magic. You're not going to hand over your algorithms, obviously. You're not going to hand over your IP. But it's super important because if an engineer has to sign off on it, they have to understand kind of like where did the data come from, how did it come in, and be able to QA the process, which I think is important. We tell them, build a tool for them to do that, make it easy for them, don't make it hard. Because it's actually easier to QA an AI-generated work than maybe even QAing a young engineer's work.
Yeah, it's interesting because even absent AI, we've seen various assaults on licensure. And to the uneducated, this might seem the opportunity to, push there and make a play that a particular AI engine with all the information that could be fed could be licensable.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remind you, if those of you, I can't get into the app, feel free to ask questions. I know some of you are able to get in, but not everybody. But Lisa.
So these startups, I'm curious, one of the things as architects and engineers that we pride ourselves on is that creativity and that last push across the line, right? Mm-hmm. And so this idea of 80% automation and then the last 20% being that lens of experience and understanding, that feels like that gap's getting smaller and smaller. I guess my question is, these startups, are they peering and teaming or aligning themselves with other engineering firms to develop these products? Or are they feeding manuals and past designs and past things into their own AI generative models that are helping them to develop the analysis software or whatever that's being used?
So I have over 100 strategic investors, many in this room. We are very proactive in making sure our startups are working with industry. And I would say challenging both sides, right? And, the benefit of how we operate is, telling startups, like, if they show up and say, we're going to disrupt civil engineering, I'm like, don't say that. Right. Like, you're not getting the meeting. Like, it's not happening. And the way when I started the firm, I was basically, like, retired. And my whole thing was, if we're going to move the industry forward, there has to be a common R&D platform, right? And a big part of that is know-how, and a big part of that is capital. We're writing $2 million checks and we bring in other investors with us. So we're capitalizing these companies, two-person companies, with $2 to $5 million day one to go build magic. That is impossible for an engineering company. That you could try, but it's not. And you're not going to attract the right talent and all those things, right? So we believe a lot of what we do is that the case with everyone else? Not necessarily. But we really do partner with our investors. It's interesting. Our investors ask me, like, KP, like, how often are we going to talk to me? Like, as much as you will take my call. We're not going to operate in a vacuum. So it's, all of our startups they kind of have like big brothers and sisters, so to speak.
So, workforce of the future.
Yes.
For engineering companies. K-12 programs are teaching coding. Engineering universities are not teaching coding. We need, to your point, we need people that see a solution in engineering and build the solution via automation. And I think I need some key words, KP, on how do we convince engineering schools that this work that's AI is not just a computer engineering or an electrical engineering issue. It's an all engineering issue, or you won't have a job.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I'm very active with Georgia Tech still, so I would say the civil engineering department there is probably a little bit different because I'm pretty heavy-handed. Like, we shall do this. And turns out I write checks to the school, so they listen to me. But and then both my kids are there. So both my kids, one's ME, one's IE. They both have had 2 coding classes at Georgia Tech, and honestly, they get more out of like their own intellectual curiosity, and they just want to do things better. And when they see archaic technology, even in university, they're like, "Dad, there's a better way. I'm going to go find it." So I think it's getting better, but we don't teach Excel. We don't teach Excel. I don't think in accounting school they have a Excel class. It's just like it's commonly, like you figure it out, you use it. And I think that's where technology is really moving. The coding skills will continue to be less and less hard. Building AI 10 years ago, I spent $5 million doing that. Doing it today, I could probably do it with $500,000 because the technology keeps getting easier and easier to get to. So there's a question around, like, as this technology becomes more pervasive, do you really need civil engineers that need to know how to code? All right, cool.
I think there is those that aren't coming out of school, though. Those are a little advanced in the workforce. I think there's some reskilling or upskilling opportunities to be done there.
Yeah, 100%. I had an intern this summer, 15-year-old kid. I love hiring high school interns to work directly for me, scar them for life. I had them research the top E&R firms and basically research their websites and pattern recognize what the words, what the imagery. And it was so amazing how regional firms talked about community and their people. Large firms, it's almost like they all built the same website designer built it all, right? It was innovation, sustainability, right? Our people. Not community, but our people. So the messaging's all very similar. But what I'll tell you is, when I talk to the kids I talk to, both at Columbia, Georgia Tech, everywhere else, I try to get them excited about our industry. So like my middle kid, I said, "Did you know you can fly drones for a living?" He's like, "What? No, Dad. Like with the movie industry? I'm not working in the movie industry." I'm like, "No, 3 of my general contractor investors have 10 openings for drone operators. And it pays like 80. He's like, "What? I can literally fly drones for a job?" I'm like, "Yeah, and you get to travel the world flying drones." So I'm like slowly sucking him in. He chose to do imaginary engineering, but I'm sucking him in, right? I'm trying to suck him in. And so I think we do need to look at these technologies in a very specific way to keep these kids excited. I mean, if we're going to tell them, like, "Hey, you're going to go do construction material testing and, in architecture, you're going to draw door details." I mean, I would argue that if BIM hadn't been invented or pushed in the industry, we would have a major, major architectural shortage. Because otherwise, like, come in and draw details all day, like, that's not what I signed up for. These kids want to get to work and doing meaningful work right away, and paying their dues is just something that's not in their vocabulary. So I think it's important that we get the kids excited about the innovation we're doing. I think if we don't, then we do have a bigger problem.
So there's a question specific about Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
How accurate is that? Are you able to use the data directly out of that, or is there still some sort of human follow-up inspection work needed once you have that data?
No, it's all automated. It's all automated. It can inspect better than a person. The level of quality, the accuracy, it's much better than any person can really. It's computers, accuracy. Computers are good at accuracy. But it's also taken us, here's the difference. We funded this team and said, for 3 years, I don't want you to have any revenue. I don't care about customers. Don't hire a marketing person. You don't need a website. Forget it. Focus on building the right technology, which is what it takes. You can't build innovative things and say, have it up and ready in 6 months. It takes 3 to 5 years to build anything interesting. Otherwise, you're not really solving a hard problem. What's interesting is they've driven a ton of revenue because one of their videos went viral on LinkedIn. And all of a sudden, their phone started ringing. So now they're like, "KP, what do we do? Like, And so they just signed a 7-figure contract. 4-person company signed a 7-figure contract, and they barely have a website because other engineers have looked at what they're doing and have been so impressed that they're just referring it around.
A couple more here. I think Marcus had the slide about the disruption in the AE industry of maybe being 37%. It's kind of remarkably precise. You maybe let slide that you have an opinion on that. What do you think about that? Higher, lower? Too early to tell?
So what I would say is, I think if we look at AI as a back office advantage, like you're done. I think the biggest thing we have to do is get more client-centric, understand what a client experience looks like. You know, our customers kind of endure us. We're the necessary evil of getting what they want. Oh, let me call my engineer. Versus using these technologies to be more client-centric. Because the further you move it to the back, it's a race to the bottom. Because everybody will do the same thing. How to use this technology to really build deeper relationships, spend more time with clients, develop new service lines with clients that are much more client-centric. You know, if you created a map and here's the customer and here's the billing department, if we're going to move all the technology further and further away from the client, you will lose. If you move it closer and closer and closer to the client, you will win. That's the bottom line. And so I think that's the creative question. I mean, I love it. Like, we are problem solvers. So how do we think about using technology to move closer and closer to develop a client experience that our customer says, hey, when I work with this engineering firm, here's how it works. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I love working with them. Oh, you too? You don't do that? Because all else being equal, an RFP goes out, 10 proposals come in, project profiles look the same, bios look the same, proposal response looks the same. What's the only thing that the customer has to make a decision on? Price. That's the only variable, is price. And so I think that's the opportunity.
So knowing our industry as you do then, what are the biases that you see with traditional architects and engineers that really become barriers to the type of implementation that you're suggesting we really need to do in order to be successful and not be relegated to the scrap heap of history?
Well, with the exception of, I worked for Frank Geary for about a year and a half. I think this idea that everything we do is so unique and so different, and every project is so much different than the last project. I think that's a story we like to tell ourselves. There are definitely projects that are definitely very different, 100% agree, but a lot of projects, you know, architects, I would say, are there any architects in the room? Okay. So, you know, architects have this idea that like, I even had one architect, I had to remind an architect once, it's like, it's not your building, it's the client's building. Just remember, it's the client's building. It's not your building, it's the client's building. When you start referring to it as your building, you know, so I think this idea that every project is this unique product, they might be unique products, but they are also highly configurable. And there is a pattern. And what happens is the best engineers that run like water department or whatever, they start to learn those patterns and they apply them for their own benefit. They don't necessarily apply it systematically to the business. So I think that's one of the big, every project's different. KP, every project's different. Like, is it? Like, maybe. Yeah.
On the topic of bias, this is one that always kind of gets my ears up. You know, your data shows it's obviously a young science, but bias can be a very real thing. And I've been in some conversations with Microsoft over the last month, and I'm shocked when they start to talk about responsible AI and their real blind spot to what bias can be. For example, climate change. Some think it's good, some think it's real, some think it's there but not as bad as others think. So what does AI tell us as an example of what the path is going to be? And do we all agree with it? So, I mean, you can kind of see this could start to tumble a way that may not be in the mainstream, depending on who's telling the AI what good and bad is. Does that make sense?
No, it does. But we've been dealing with that for a minute now, even with Google, right? I mean, you put something into Google and whatever comes up top might be a sponsored ad. I mean, there's always going to be inherent bias in people that will highly be translated to an AI engine. The difference is you can course correct. You're more likely to course correct an AI engine than you are a person's point of view. You're not convincing a person that climate change is not real. Good luck with that. Good luck with having, or that climate change is real. Good luck with that conversation if you ever change their mind. The reality is with an AI, you can start, as you start to identify bias, you can start course correcting on bias. And that means you have to feed it lots of data from lots of points of view. And I think back to does it matter what AI thinks or does it matter what your client thinks? And I think these biases will start to get rooted out over time. But it takes enough of the right, look, if everybody on the internet and Twitter, or whatever it's called now, all had a singular point of view, it would be biased. But I think as you start looking at different data sets, you have to responsibly welcome data sets that are maybe not your own. But inherently, I believe that AI has the better opportunity to course correct against bias than actually the human condition. It's like trying to convince someone to vote for a different party. Good luck with that.
A question on the policy. How do you balance in your policy and your approach then the idea that you want people with some freedom to explore and learn how to use these tools with the risk management side of things?
I think it's about creating boundary. I mean, that's boundaries around what you can and can't use it for. And then the best thing you can do is like, hey, go do that. Instead of letting, like, hey, that sounds fantastic. And then I want you to present in 30 days to the executive team. I mean, if you want to keep young people in your firms excited, including them in strategy, like they love the idea of being, called upon for that. So I would even say, like, assign like a task. Say, hey, you're young. You're this AI generation. I saw a chart. You're under 34. I was at a conference. I saw a chart. Why don't you go figure out how we respond to RFPs better using AI? And come back in 90 days and show us all what you learned. And I think through that process, there's transfer of knowledge, and then you can start to say, I think about like proposal generation, probably a lot less risk in terms of than something. I know when I was an engineer, that's what they made me do, is write proposals all day long. So I think if you're part of the process, then people will sign up for that, and governance becomes a lot easier.
So this one is regarding data use. As our engineers and technicians are pounding on the keyboards, is Bentley or Autodesk essentially capturing that data for free and basically creating the ability for the machine to learn what does an engineer do with their software?
I would have to ask them. You're all business people. What would you do? And I'm sure, there is no better time than to review your terms and conditions with your software providers. I don't know if anyone saw the news with Zoom. They just did a quick little, hey, we're changing our policy. And someone actually read it and posted on it. They're like, hey, they're stealing all your data and using it to create their AI model. And then they had to come back out and say, oh, sorry, we were just kidding. Sorry you weren't paying attention. It's no better time to pay attention to kind of your terms and conditions with your software providers. I would definitely, that is a project that I would prioritize. Not because you're going to sue it, just to know. It will help you know, and it's, it's a great time to ask lots of questions and reset your thinking.
There's so much to say in so little time. First of all, I would just say as an observation, you are amazingly appropriate for this audience at this time. For so many reasons, and what you've said is mind expanding to say the least. The other thing, you must be 100 years old with all of your experience, but you look like you're 34. You think like you're 34.
I'm 53.
Yeah, you really. I would love to have you on retainer. But one of the things that you said that is, you alluded to it, but maybe you can comment a little bit more on this. I'm so concerned from the government regulation perspective about their ability to even fathom what it is that you're talking about and what we will be doing. And, in my experience in the past, it's always been DOD that has led the charge on this kind of thing. Are they still in that position? Are they able to catch up? And if not, what does the tech community do to fill that gap?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really was on my mind a lot. Like in the middle of last year, this stuff was, we just have early insights into what's happening. And, we have our investment stuff, and we also have an advisory business. And our advisory business, we signed a deal with NIBS. And NIBS came to us and said, look, our constituents, which are government, I was like, don't you guys still run doctor checks? Like, what is up? I was like, that was my selling point. Like, you guys still run doctor's checks. Don't tell me you know anything about technology, right? Like, it's nonsense. So that was my sales pitch. And they signed a deal with us basically where we are helping them build and vet. And instead of just being an obstacle, let's figure out and build process and methodology. Because I think using them as like all of us can decide on some governance today, right? I can go take it to the CEO of NIBS and say, here's what we think it needs to be. And he's like, KP, I don't even know what this is, but I trust you. Like, you're the expert. So now I'm going to go socialize it with GSA and Corps of Engineers and everybody else and make it his idea. And fantastic. Go get it done. So I think there's so much opportunity to collaborate. It was kind of funny. I think there were a few people in this room that hit when the announcement came out with NIBS. They're like, what is this? It doesn't make sense. I'm like, here's what this is. They need help. And they understand that, I could poke them in the eye about doctor checks, and they're like, okay, let's do something.
Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, just kind of go back to governance and, security. So, a lot of the major companies around the country have banned ChatGPT as far as use, particularly financial institutions. There's firms in this room that have banned GPT from use. What is the risk if you go to a purely enterprise, like a Microsoft enterprise model, that would be closed, so you're not getting... Is there a risk of firms like us going to a strictly enterprise model? Are you still getting the same data or the same value out of that versus weighing that against the risk of going to more of an open architecture like a ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if y'all know, but Elon Musk was one of the founders of OpenAI. And he's actually he started a competitive company. It was started off as a nonprofit. A bunch of tech billionaires put a bunch of money in. It was supposed to be a nonprofit. It was supposed to be very mission-oriented around, like, do good. We know this AI stuff is coming, do good. And then as soon as Microsoft invested $10 billion into them, he said, oh, we're now a for-profit business, and I don't know if the value systems will stay the same, which is fun to hear Elon Musk talk about value systems. But so I think you're going to see, one, OpenAI is no longer kind of a neutral open source. That's not really where it's at. There's a certain data set. What I would say is, generally speaking, how we think about working with these companies is just being very specific and deliberate about how to work with these companies. And whether it's Microsoft, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's Bard, they're all developing very interesting things. I'm having a meeting Monday with a company called Typeface AI. He was the former CTO of Adobe, so I knew him from back in my tech days. So I'm having a meeting with him. He pretty much, you load all your PowerPoints into his platform, and then you basically tell it when you need to write your next PowerPoint. And it understands all the brand, the wording, the everything by sucking in all that data. And that's your data. They're not informing the rest of it because that use case is so unique to you, right? So what are they sucking in? They're probably sucking other data around best practices of white space and font usage and all these things, brand things. And so I think what you're going to start to see is the baseline is, why do I need to invent something that is basically like an AI search engine versus proprietary data sets I want to build on top of it that are more important to me and that I own? And I will tell you this, I think the opportunities around, if you build your own private data set, a small engineering firm is not going to do that. You can actually be in that business. You can license your data set. You can license your private LLM to smaller firms, to maybe other industries, to product companies, right? A curtain wall company, like a Conair, they might be like, hey, I'd love to license your data. So I am so excited about, like, where we're at as an industry to really kind of finally get rewarded for the work we do because of a lot of these technologies. Kind of the last point on this, if you ask anyone that knows me, all I do is I probably say asymmetry 10 times a day, 20 times a day. I really believe in the building asymmetric business models. Hour worked, hour pay, let me say positive asymmetric models. Hour worked, hour pay, like timesheets, has the potential of going the other way. But this idea that you spend an hour and you have some risk, right? Lawyers have done it with contingency. They invest their time and they maybe win 3 out of 4 cases, but they take like 30%. My brother's a lawyer. He's like, my retainers pay the bills. My settlements buy me my 5th house, right? Because it's a 30% on a $15 million settlement. And so they have figured out asymmetry, pay the bills through retainers, but every once in a while I get a pop, right? I get to have a big win. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I've been advising a lot of firms right now. How do you go through the process of building asymmetric models, and how do you think about it? Because I think that's what this technology really has the opportunity to do. Get us out of the timesheet business. Nobody likes filling them out. Nobody likes reviewing them. Nobody likes timesheets. Can we all agree on that?
Except the federal government.
You guys have these slides. I don't read from slides. I think this idea of how you want to evolve your firm, am I really going to build something, or do I really want to build power users, right? Do I want to build a committee that says, and it's a great way to engage with your younger teams and maybe inspire some of your mid-level managers that are tired of looking at timesheets all day, to be on a committee to say, hey, we want to build power users to use this technology well, and first build policies, build narrow use cases, and demonstrate it to us, and then I want you to train other people to be power users. I think that is a fantastic place to start. I really do. And then as you start building more power users, they will come to you and they will say, hey, have we ever thought about building? Have we ever thought about using our data to do X, Y, and Z? But just like you probably did with CAD or GIS or BIM or anything else, building kind of that power user group is a great way to set your own policies and also kind of get your people. Because what they're hearing is I was talking to a young woman at AECom. She's like, yeah, they banned AI at AECom. I was like, really? I was like, so you stopped using it? She's like, no, I just use it on my phone. That is the reality. Setting a ban and policy. The ban is interpretive. Oh, you said I can't use AI on my company machine. You didn't say I couldn't use AI on my phone. That's not explicit. I do think this idea of doing nothing is really not an option. I think you have to do something. You just have to figure out what works. We've been looking at a lot of interesting ideas. I think from a leadership perspective, the idea of R&D consortiums around these topics. There are certain things that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We are a very collaborative industry, so seeing how we could do, we do joint ventures on, we joint venture on one project and then we compete on another. That's just the business, right? Can you start to build joint ventures around topics? I think that's super interesting because if we all got in a room and said, hey, we really want to solve AI for pipe sizing, making it up. Everybody chips in $1 million, let's go do it. And the next thing you know, you're sitting on a pool at $10 million and you're building a company together. Why not? This idea that I'm going to go do it alone, one, I guarantee you, whatever you build in-house, whatever number they told you, they're wrong. Right? And guess what? The minute you don't give them the budget, they'll leave. And then you're left with a half-baked cake. So there is a benefit of doing things, just like we do projects, to really start thinking about tackling big problems and JVing on them.
On that point, it's more of a question to the group and Linda and Jay, and it says DPC has some of the largest engineering firms. Shouldn't we create a consortium to develop some basic tools to share and move ahead by creating new standards? That would probably be the challenge for Raj and his technology committee, but that opportunity is there. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm doing one right now in the prefab, industrialized construction industry, working with Berkshire Hathaway, and a bunch of folks like that are like, hey, home builders, this prefab thing, like what are we doing? Like, how should we be playing? And so I think there's some really interesting opportunities that I always say they're not really venture fundable, but they can be like pretty impactful to the industry.
So let's talk about construction a little bit. I think you gave some really good examples of robotics and inspection, but maybe can you expand on how you see the construction industry transforming because of the advance of all these AI-powered tools? What do you think that's going to look like as it impacts the people in this room?
Yeah, I think, our partner base is about $50 billion a year in construction volume. So we get to hear lots of stuff from the CEOs. I think the areas that they're really focusing on is automation and robotics. Along with that, the interesting thing about robotics, and I think it's important for this room to really start thinking about, when you think about advanced materials, that in the past we're like, well, the labor doesn't want to. I remember I helped design an aerated concrete plant back in the day, and it shut down in 2 years because the people on the ground would not use aerated concrete blocks. It was like masonry was like, no, I won't use that. Right now you have machines doing the work. So when you think about deploying advanced materials, there's a lot of interest to do that, especially with net zero, decarbonization. There's a lot of interest around that. And so I think what they're starting to do is really focus in on a lot of the field automation because they can't find good subs. So they're looking at, there's this weird pendulum shifting around self-performing again. Like we didn't used to self-perform, but it turns out the people that are performing for us aren't doing a great job and we can't get them to bid on work anyway. So maybe we should look at doing some of that. Like the drywall finishing and painting robot, several RGCs are like, I'll buy 20 of them. I'll just start self-performing paint. Why not? Buy the machines. So I think it's going to be interesting the way they're thinking about that. Inspection, the idea of a superintendent being able to walk around, get things inspected using computer vision and getting sign-off on that, as well as like preempting any RFIs in the field. So I would say inspection and robotics are the two big areas. Advanced materials is starting to come along. They're just so close to the customer, and the customers are asking them, like, why aren't we using this, and this instead? Why aren't we using mass timber? Why aren't we, owners go around the world and see things, and they come back and say, I want to do that. So things like mass timber, most GCs would have been like, are you sure you want to do mass timber? Now they have to kind of say, like, yeah, let's go do mass timber.
Do you recall about 5, 6, 7 years ago, Katera, the vertically integrated construction company that was going to change how construction gets done? I don't know to what degree they were AI powered, but in the end that sort of flamed out. But I go back to your example of prime movers educating the market. Do you see that there was some education of the market that somebody else might pick up on that, and now with the advanced tools that we've got, take another run at something like that?
Yeah, I think it's the advanced tools. I think Katera, I know those guys. I think they made the mistake of setting revenue expectations. They should have just gone stealth mode for 5 years and built things. And what happened was they built a little bit, they raised a bunch of money, said they were going to do $1 billion in revenue, and then they realized, like, oh, we're not, so let's go buy a general contractor. Let's go buy a lighting company. So they essentially did like a strategic roll-up instead of actually executing on their vision. And it's funny, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I posted something the other day for my startups, and I said, look, Sunday night when you're like freaking out about your startup, remember why you're here. Remember your vision. You didn't create a vision to get ARR or MRR. Like, that was not your vision for starting a company and sacrificing so much. And I think Katera lost sight of the vision and mission, and because they set expectations around revenue. I think if you're going to do big things, especially in our space, go be in a bunker for 3 years and go build hard stuff and build important things and then go to market. Because otherwise you start setting expectations around revenue and your product's not ready.
So one of the questions I've been saving for towards the end is sort of this high-level encapsulation of what is the role of the human brain going to be in the AI world?
To push yourself harder. I think in a degree, a lot of people just kind of walk through life, and it's like, I was telling someone the other day, I'm 53 years old, I have a 15-month-old as well.
Oh,
I get that a lot. So people always ask me, like, what's it like? And I was like, you know what? I know how to do my job. I know how to be a good partner. I know how to take care of myself. Like, check, check, check. It's pretty easy, and it's a lot of fun. In my 20s, I didn't know anything. I was just trying to figure out how to be a good husband and do my work and build a business. And then let's throw 2 babies in the middle of that and see what happens. So it's kind of unjust the way this works. But I think giving yourself plenty of time to be able to really think creatively. And I think there's a little bit, we get to the point where we're good at doing our job, and it's pretty easy. And we get stuck there because we're performing, we're earning. And I think it's really about challenging yourself. Like, what new business could I build? What new thing could I build? I had a big electrical distributor come to me, and they said, hey, we want to get into the consulting business. I'm like, really? Tell me more. And like, well, we want to go buy a company. I'm like, why buy a company? Why are you going to go buy a company? Go build a company. Oh, I don't know if I have the bandwidth. I'm like, this is the CEO. I was like, I know you barely work 40 hours a week. Stop acting like that. Like, I know what you do. You look at reports all day. You're a building product distributor. I know what you do all day. So why not take on a project? Why not go build something and challenge yourself that way? So I think if you can get yourself out of the monotony and choose to get yourself out of the monotony, you can go build. It's just so much easier to build stuff now, which I find it just, you don't have to depend on 100 IT people to get anything done. Is anybody hosting their own email still? I mean, I don't even know what IT people do anymore. Everything's in the cloud. I hope you're not printing, because that's not very green. So what do they do all day?
Security.
They can't do it better than outsourcing.
Yeah, true.
Right? And so I think what that means is we can all, we can kind of dig in and do more. Be inventive.
Yeah, Clint.
So I'm going to elaborate on that question again about the human brain, because I think the role in engineering, the pushback that I get a lot when I talk about AI is that, well, what, Clint, we're just going to push a button and the water plant's going to pop out. And they ask what the role is, and the answer that I give them, KP, is that I said, and you've alluded to it earlier, that you have to tweak the algorithms. You have to tweak the data. You have to take the biases out. When you play SimCity, you don't realize that the developer of that game wanted you to build vertical buildings 100 miles high and put a police station on every corner to win the game. So I think that creativity at the front within engineering will help us take biases out and recognize things that we're preloading that may not be fixed. They're adaptable. And I'm counting on engineers to be that creative front end. And then I'm counting on engineers on the backside that are doing quality assurance, quality control, to look at it and say a 100-mile building and a police station on every corner is probably not a good solution set for my client. So we're going to send this one back, right? To me, that's the value of a human brain, is to question, be critical of, to think about whether that's the right answer for my client. So I'm not eliminating all engineers when I talk about AI, but I may be getting rid of 60% of them,
Maybe.
right?
Or you're developing them different. I mean, I think that, developing people through that route work, right? Multiplication tables over and over again, right? That may not be how we do things, which is a lot of how the industry has been. Like, I develop young engineers by just giving them highly repeatable route work, go do this, and a lot of grunt work. So a lot of the people that maybe move up are the ones that are really good at doing the route work, and maybe the ones that fall apart are the more creative ones in their young days of their career. I think I quickly got out of the industry because I was like, I don't know, I'm going to go inspect another caisson? Oh my God, why am I doing this? Someone else can go down there and scratch rock. Why is it me? So I think we could be running off some of the most creative people because they're not good at the route work. I do think, when I think about, the big problems, housing shortage, if you think about commercial real estate, everybody's trying to figure out what to do with this commercial real estate. We're not at the table. We're not at the table, and we should be. We should be around that table helping solve, those bigger problems. And And I think that's what it frees up kind of that brain space for.
Going back to your policy, and you talked about, I like the line about how clients tolerate us because they have to, at least for the moment. What is your recommendation on the transparency regarding the use of AI tools at this moment in time? On the one hand, there's might be an expectation that we are, but on the other hand, we don't want to make them think it was too easy. What does that look like?
I think I would say, like, instead of thinking about transparency in a binary way, I think it's about like being collaborative. How many of y'all have asked your clients, like, hey, all this new AI stuff, what are you doing? What are you looking at? Love to hear what you have to say about it. How many of y'all have asked your clients that? All right. So it's back to being client-centric, right? Because you might find out from your clients that they say, well, we could see how AI could do X, Y, and Z, but we don't ever see it doing this, right? So us trying to create, read our clients' minds is kind of and I think that's sometimes the hard part about being in an industry that's been around for so long. I had a CEO ask me the other day, like, hey, how do I think about this? I'm like, go interview 100 people. Get out of your office, go talk to 100 people. He's like, yeah, I'll get someone to do it. I'm like, don't get someone to do it. You go do it. I don't care that you're running $1 billion a year firm. You get out of the office, you go talk to 100 clients and ask them about these topics. Ask them what they think about decarbonization. Ask them what they think about AI. What do they expect out of us? If they could reinvent your job, how would they do it? Go ask them like super pointed questions and go learn a lot from them and then figure out what's your next best move. And I think you'd be shocked at what clients will share with you.
So I got one more here. This one seems to be more of a social question, but I'm going to put it to you anyway.
Okay.
Do you think guaranteed wages for people displaced by AI will be happening in the new future, for example, the fast food industry?
Yeah, it's a tough one because on one hand, you talk to these industries and they say, we can't hire enough people. I was walking around here and I was like, oh my God, they've staffed really well around here. I don't know how they do it. So I asked one of the staff members, I'm like, you guys are really well staffed. I've been to a lot of resorts where I'm like, having to keep my towels for the whole week apparently. Like what is happening, right? And they're like, oh God, we get 3 meals here. They take care of us. We get 3 meals. We get overtime. I was like, really? And so just like talking, so I think, when you look at some of the monotonous jobs, whether it's, flipping burgers or whatever, I think there's a real question around, like, there is a shortage there. And then there's a question of if you put robotics into a McDonald's, does that mean you could pay the other people an actual livable wage? It is fascinating to me. I mean, I spend a lot of time, I don't have a lot of hobbies, so I just go talk to a lot of people. And I don't know how someone makes a living in this country at $18 an hour. I just don't understand. So does that mean if you're working at McDonald's, we have some robotics, and the other people get to make $30 an hour because the robots are doing the monotonous work? Does that challenge the people that were comfortable doing the monotonous work and maybe had higher potential to go learn and do other things? Hopefully. But, someone told me the other day, they were like, it was the CEO of Savills. He said, look, we were a farming community not too long ago. And everybody thought the tractors and everything else was just going to kill it. Like, we all figured out something else to do. So I think we have to have faith that there's always going to be something else to do, and maybe taking the monotony. Because unfortunately, the cost models, I don't know if it's true, but McDonald's will tell you, like, hey, we can't make a profit unless we pay people $18 an hour. And I'm like, well, that's a terrible business. Like, that indentured servitude. I used to have this conversation with Frank Geary all the time. Like, Frank, people with master's degrees from Harvard come and work here for $50,000 a year in L.A.? Why are these 30-something, like, they have roommates. They're 30 years old and have roommates because you don't pay. He's like, well, they want my brand. They get to put my name on their resume. I'm like, Frank, that's not a business model. It's a kind of a business model. I don't think we should be, basing our business models on not paying people well.
UPS drivers make $175K, right?
Right.
What are we paying as entry-level engineers? You should ask ourselves that question.
And more so, like, my son's going through the job hunt right now, and he's been amazed at our wages in our industry. What they're not communicating to us, what is the path forward? Like, tell me what happens next for me to make more money. How do I do that? And a lot of the UPS stuff, part of what they're saying too, what they're not saying, look, autonomous vans are coming. They're already here. And they can do a lot of the last mile stuff. So will there be a lot of vans that are autonomous, driverless, that actually, therefore you have fewer drivers, and you can pay those fewer drivers more?
I have one question.
Yeah.
What do you think the AI will impact the labor unions?
I don't ask myself a lot of those questions. Because I'm a very purist around, like, help me understand the business model and the value it creates. And I don't know that I'm seeing that a lot with unions. I don't know that they're really helping protect wages in America. It could be the opposite. If you look at what happened, the yellow trucking thing, there's a lot to unpack there. It's not just as simple as, the unions put them out of business. There's a lot more there. There was terrible management too. But I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay, that's all I've got in the app. Any other questions in the group here? It's a lot to take in. I'm sure there will be some further discussion.
There's my
over
email.
Drinks tonight, yep.
I brought some of my books for y'all to pick up. I actually check my own email. I don't have an assistant. I don't believe in assistants. I use technology. So send me an email, I actually respond. So.
What about automated assistance?
I use a lot of automation around calendaring and scheduling and all that, but I wouldn't know what to do with an assistant. They'll just mess up my travel.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you, KP.